It's all on slides.
Perfect.
Is there a clicker?
Yep. Right there. And we'll have you test it real quick.
Yep.
But the person that does the sound is right there, right? And he's coming to do something. I'll keep you updated.
Okay, thank you.
You ready?
Mm-hmm.
Excited?
A little scared, but
Nervous? Yeah. Those are the 3 questions I asked everyone. I have got a not really nervous, excited, and ready. A not ready, not excited, and very nervous. And you're a bit middle. I like
yeah.
that. I think you got this.
Yeah.
Only had a semester to prepare. How much did you procrastinate?
Couple weeks.
To, I just want to test it to make sure nothing changed.
What's his on?
Say something.
Please remember that you're here in Fuller Hall where cell phones are not allowed.
Hello?
Please put them away. Put them away in a place where they're not going to fall out onto the floor, because we had a rain of cell phones falling onto the floor in our first session. So please, if you have water bottle, please don't let things fall onto the floor, and put your phones away so that you can attend fully. So I'm sure you heard this in your last venue, but our seniors have put a great deal of time, energy, and deliberation into their projects. They're presenting them to you today. And please honor that with your attention and your decorum. So just as in chapel, please do not talk to each other during the presentations. Please do not talk to each other during the presentations. Please pay attention. I'm delighted to bring to the stage Dustin DeGrenia for his capstone emerald ash borer versus ash trees. Dustin.
Thank you.
A pest that endangers 5% of Vermont's ash population may not seem crazy substantial, but with some quick research, I concluded that 100% of our forests is somewhere around 3.4 billion. Even with just that 3.4 billion, 5% of that is 170 million ash trees. Emerald ash borer, also known as EAB, their larvae are cream-colored, flattened, elongated, and composed of a series of segments stacked. They start out around half of a centimeter and grow to be just around a centimeter. From left to right, pupa to adulthood, the EAB will slowly get a tapered, dull rear and a blunt head. They typically grow to be around 1.5 inch long. The way that things are going in relevance in regards to my topic will lead to national declines of a favorable material. Emerald ash borer, or EAB, first appeared in the Detroit area around 2000, presumed to have been secretly in the United States since the early 90s after illicitly coming in from the US, from Asia, in wood pallet crates. From bioadvance.com, a website mostly for science-based solutions to help care and maintain for the health and beauty of your garden, quote, originally from Asia, the emerald ash borer was first discovered in the Detroit area in 2002. It is believed to have entered the country on wood packing materials in China, end quote. Not only does it eliminate a very good type of wood, but it costs the US billions of dollars, and so far it will only keep increasing. Over the past 20 years, it has had widespread effects across the US and has wreaked havoc on the ash species alike. This left some cities as an unforested urban mess. For the first 2 years EAB had landed down, scientists couldn't even or hadn't even realized the widespread damage to the ash species was caused by this tiny bug. From American Forest, a domain hub for all things forest-related in America, in southeast Michigan, where EAB was first established, scientists have documented 99% mortality in first stands dominated by green ash, white ash, or black ash. More than 60 million ash trees ranging from 1 inch to 5 feet in diameter have been killed by EAB in this area alone. This does not mean all hope is lost, though. Dr. Deborah G. McCullough from American Forest talks about later on blue ash, which ranges in southern areas of the country. Quote, scientists recently determined that blue ash is relatively resistant to EAB, making it likely that this will survive the EAB invasion. Understanding more about the chemical and physical traits that underlie blue ash resistance may eventually lead to a selective propagation of resistant ash cultivars. My broad love for the outdoors and the immediate help needed by the ash species led me to this topic. I propose to allow for more general knowledge to be learned about emerald ash borer in a younger school-type setting around middle school. My goal in the most simple of terms, reduce emerald ash borer populations without the use of harmful insecticides. The eradication of EAB is quite impossible now, but populations can still be reduced to the point where the next generation of ash trees can have somewhat of a fighting chance to protect themselves. From Vermont Invasives, a local source of media based around invasives in the state, in Johnson there resides 440 ash trees along back roads. To remove all of these trees, for instance, if they were all infested, it would cost around $132,000 just for the removal alone. The overall idea for this capstone first arose during woodworking when Matthew Stark would talk about how the types of wood we were currently using to create boxes would likely not be around in the future due to this invasive pest. This specifically made me think even farther back to around 6th grade when our class would take field trips to a recently retired Mr. Wurzburg's farm, a short bus trip from the middle school, where we would take our journals into the forest and collectively write about our surroundings, what trees were what, if they were dead, so on and so forth. The topics of EAB could so easily be integrated into a field trip just like the ones at Mr. Wurzburg's, keeping a semi-academic environment while also just being a community and learning. It's quite important to be informed about EAB as they can be quite harmful to natural environments and more specifically the ash tree species in general. According to Connecticut Energy, a department for the protection of energy and environment residing in Connecticut, quote, the emerald ash borer has been responsible for the death and decline of tens of millions of ash trees in 35 states from the Midwest to New England and south to Louisiana. The federal government has largely given up on efforts to quell its spread, says Abigail Giles, who writes for the Vermont Public, a local news source. In January of 2021, the United States Department of Agriculture, Animal and Plant Health Inspection Service, or APHIS, eventually terminated a regulatory domestic program implemented in 2003, and almost 1,200 counties in 35 states across the US were released from federal regulation. Although this did not affect the restricted importation of most wooden states, the overall goal and aspiration of this regulation were gone. A commonplace idea during this time was to not transport firewood, as EAB could easily integrate themselves into the logs. This was ultimately lost. From Vermont Invasives, a local source, 286 species of arthropods, also known as insects or spiders, depend on North American ash trees for food and shelter. At least 44 species of these arthropods feed exclusively on ash. According to the National Park Service, or NPS, quote, emerald ash borer, EAB, has first been detected in the National Capital Region in 2014, has killed most of the majority of 300,000 ash trees once present in the region's parks, end quote. Ash tree populations are plummeting. Female ash will eat leaves surrounding the ash tree, and then once they are done, they plant around 40 to 70 eggs in the crevices of the ash tree. Once they have hatched, the larvae instantly bore right into the tree to begin girdling the tree. As seen on this slide, the damage kind of looking like worms running along logs. Once they are done pupating into adults for around 2 years, they chew a telltale D-shaped exit hole in the bark and fly out, repeating the process over again. Abigail Giles interviewed Josh Holman, a forest health specialist with the Department of Forest, Parks, and Recreation, Quote, the wasps are native to eastern Russia and China, where they hunt emerald ash borer larvae and eggs in the wild. The US Department of Agriculture spent about a decade running tests in a quarantine facility before they released them to make sure they wouldn't harm other species in the US. Obviously, nothing will change overnight, but extensive research has led to this temporary solution to EAB that is quite effective. Parasitoid wasps. These stingless wasps are released with no intention of nesting or protecting a nest. Instead, they clash head-on with EAB. Not only do these wasps not attack humans or pets, but they purposefully paralyze ash borer larvae and inject them with a splice of their own eggs, which later hatch and eat the grub that is left behind. Although they can be experimental at times and the wasps can have trouble establishing a standing in some areas, for the most part, they do their job and accomplish it well. Preventative measures are crucial to pest management in general, not to mention something as rapid as EAB. In 2021, the United States Department of Agriculture lifted regulations saying they would rather rear those resources towards more wasps. The process of parasitoid wasps against EAB mostly consisting of walking around, finding symptoms, taking down some notes for the government, and then taking a cup with a wasp and setting it free in hopes it will instantly go to the EAB. If the wasp goes for the emerald ash borer, in most cases it does, the wasp will immediately paralyze the ash borer, injecting their spawn with its own eggs. The wasps are quite good at hunting. They follow vibrations caused by the larvae under the bark as they feed. The wasps don't sting at people at all and have a quite sophisticated palate, leaving them with a specific taste for beetle larvae. These wasps, like EAB, come from areas in Asia. Not only does it make them natural enemies, it makes it a difficult process to get them around the world. The wasps being released have to travel via post office in cups with drops of honey. Due to this method, the wasps must be delivered and shipped within the same day. Some reiteration from earlier sources, quote, the beetles eat away at the cambium, a part of the tree that moves water and sugars up and down the trunk, end quote. In parts of southern New England, they're killing as much as 50% of all emerald ash borer larvae, the wasps. Here we have a local map of New Hampshire and Vermont and where they're standing with emerald ash borer. The red depicts areas around infestation, and the yellow depicts the potential area they could get to. New Hampshire has been hit quite hard, and the middle regions and the northern parts of Vermont have been hit quite hard. From Burlington Park's recreation and waterfronts, quote, ash trees have not been planted in Burlington since EAB was discovered in the US. There are 1,114 ash growing along the streets, 42 in cemeteries, and 219 growing in parks, end quote. The loss of this genus would cause a reduction in the canopy coverage and necessitate the planting of over 1,000 young trees. The resulting forest would be younger and in some locations all new trees. Once again from Abigail Giles, the Vermont Public, quote, 100 years ago, the American elm dominated New England's city streets. They were favored for their shape and shade alike, but when Dutch elm disease, a fungus, came through from 1940 to 1960, it killed some 11,000 elms in Burlington alone. Many of those elms were replaced with fast-growing, salt-tolerant green ash trees. Although ironically, the ash trees can grow quickly and provide good shade. In some cities, ash makes up to 40% of urban canopy. So unfortunately, many of our communities can experience and will experience another deforestation event similar to Dutch elm disease. Abigail Giles states that, quote, to replace even just 1,000 ash trees in Burlington, it would cost $500,000. This is an extremely high price, especially if the mortality rate of EAB is 99.7%, end quote. This is leading all ash species to a costly decline. There are many species of plants and animals in the US that are not from here, not native, but are not considered invasive because they have found a balance in the natural order of things and have not caused significant harm. Long-term monitoring and management are very important measures to limit any new infestations while making sure the old ones are either diminished or monitored with enough efficiency to not lose track of them. According to Dr. Deborah McCullough once again, quote, a 2010 analysis in ecological economics examined the potential costs of either treating or removing 50% of landscape ash trees in urban areas affected by EAB. Projected costs would exceed $10.5 billion by 2019. If suburban ash trees are included, costs nearly double, end quote. Ash trees comprise up to 50% of the municipal trees growing along boulevards and in parks and in some cities. Once ash trees die, they begin to decay relatively quickly, posing hazards to homes, vehicles, and people. Losing a substantial portion of mature trees dramatically alters the appearance of neighborhoods and diminishes property value as well. Stormwater runoffs increase, shade decreases, and air conditioner runs longer. In Southeast Michigan, municipalities' water use soared as a result of the widespread ash mortality, resulting in surcharges leveled by regional water authority. Abigail Giles later on goes on to say, quote, more than 8 billion ash trees in US forests and woodlands with a value estimated at more than 280 billion, end quote. These ash trees will only continue to decrease as time goes on, and there must be an intervention. Not only are these trees a solid wood to build, craft, or tinker with, but they are also just base quite high in property value. When in a good spot, providing additional aspects like shade, the property value only increases. There are millions of urban ash trees growing across the country in much of municipal and private lands alike. Vermont was the 31st state confirmed with EAB as of the article's writing. There are around 35 states confirmed now. Vermont Land Trust Forester Peter Van Loon says, quote, just recently people assumed emerald ash borer would kill nearly every ash tree. People went right to assuming they either needed to replant or chop down their ash trees, but it is definitely not the case, end quote. It states later on that 75% of white ash can easily survive in parts of Michigan that have seen constant EAB swarms for 17 years. This leaves an overall unknown factor to the ash trees, as they could just be overall more resistant without you even knowing. Certain factors of ash trees could potentially and intentionally be propagated into warding off EAB, or at least stand more overall resistant. I can raise a plan of action that will have some tangible effect surrounding my ideas of EAB. Even if I am not a heavily certified field scientist or forester, my topic could seamlessly slide into a middle school grade curriculum, allowing me to not only fluctuate genuine thoughts about EAB, but through an age group that is on the rise to be the future. Easily, this could mimic Mr. Wurzburg's farm trips, where we did the tree examinations and general forest topics of discussion, which already allows for perfect integration. I believe everyone could further benefit from learning about things while outdoors, while physically being outdoors, instead of in a classroom environment, which overall allows for more comfort and less stress about school. This project could lead me potentially quite far into the future timetable-wise. The benefits would be quite immense, but I still need more feedback about how to go about teaching people about invasive species and just about scientific discussion in general. Being able to teach about ongoing environmental problems today that I'm also passionate about would only further my level of detail and dedication. Although the general changes may not seem readily apparent just as the bug does, the impact will be significant. Obviously, it won't change immediately, but I can strive for a change in dynamics or just about how people think about invasive pests in general. Since the 2000s, it has been widespread across the US and gone even into some parts of Canada. This doesn't mean we are completely devised with plans of action against this invasive species. Recently, there have been multiple attempts to strengthen the ash species as a whole, making them more resistant. Ash die-off reports almost always come back with evidence of few tree stands surviving, but when they do, the ash trees are in part surviving due to a genetic advantage, allowing for overall less harbored pupa and an even slimmer survival chance for those larvae. Ash tree breeding is a big topic that I believe could work very well, but only in the future, as we just don't have the means for rapid creation or placement of these ideas as it stands currently. Fighting for a controlling element such as the parasitoid wasps would prove to be much more effective method for this current moment in time. If all time was dedicated to this resistant tree genetic propagation, the ash tree species would be long gone before they were ever even integrated. There is lots of possibilities still in the future. Thank you for listening. Sources are available upon request. Are there any questions?
Thank you, Dustin. Questions for Dustin?
So as you did your research, I'm wondering if you came across any information that surprised you that you hadn't anticipated when you were first learning about this topic, and if it helped you develop some different conclusions than you might have anticipated.
Yeah, that's a good question. So when I first started, I got a lot of results about using pesticides and neonicotinoids, which have been proven and even banned in some places due to having effects on the environment, such as giving like pollinators a sort of like slowed altered state, which ultimately leads to less pollinators and could just damage the environment even more.
Ms. Sandville?
Great job, Dustin. Was there anywhere in your research an example of the parasitoid wasp being used in a different state or in Vermont? Can you just go into that more?
Yeah, so where I got, they were tapped out in a little plastic cup. When I talked about that, I got that from Vermont Invasives, which is completely local, and it was basically a bunch of field scientists. They'd go out and just look around in the forest. Once they see symptoms, they get the wasps and just kind of let them be and let them do their thing. Does that answer your question?
Other questions?
Nice topic. I was almost 50 years old before I ever saw an elm tree. I grew up in St. Johnsbury, and all the elm trees were gone by the time I was born and have grown up. And now we have elm trees on campus. And it's my understanding, and maybe you can correct me, that they are a little different than the elm trees that were here 100 years ago. I don't know if they're genetically modified or anything like that. Is that something that would be considered with the ash trees, genetically modifying them so that we wouldn't have this problem?
I mean, yeah. I didn't specifically get too much into it in my research about elm trees, but yeah, that would be sort of what's going on with the ash trees currently, is another elm situation where we need some kind of fixing of the trees or propagation of a new genetic.
Okay, congratulations, Dustin. Thank you so much.